Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast,
where we explore natural homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Parenting Coach, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my 3 wildlings and the Papa Bear and our fixer-upper on the beach. This is episode 20, and today I'm here with my friend Dr. Azine Graff talking about emotional regulation. Azine is a psychologist and co-founder of Harmony in Parenting, who is passionate about supporting parents and children work through daily challenges through connection. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. Leaving a review for this podcast in iTunes or for the Sage Homeschooling book on Amazon takes only seconds of your time and makes a big impact in helping other families find this support. So click those stars, tell the world why this resonates with you, and make a difference. And are you supporting the work you believe in through Patreon? For as little as $1 a month, you can do your part to create the world you want to live in by supporting the people doing work that makes a difference. Feed what you want to see grow at Patreon, Patreon.com/Sage Family. We spent a beautiful sunny day at the Issaquah Salmon Hatchery with 25 friends and learned a lot from the volunteer tour guide, who also happened to be a homeschool mother. We have visited the salmon ladder at Ballard Locks a few times, which is the start of their journey home to spawn, so it was neat to visit this salmon ladder, which is the final destination for spawning. I could have stood on the bridge and watched these big fish swim up the shallow stream for hours. Then we attended an animal tracking program with our friends and a nature guide with South Sound Nature School. Nature for School programs can be a wonderful option for homeschooling families who want weekly programs and/or childcare. This week, we went to the best pumpkin patch with a big group of wonderful friends. It could not have been a more beautiful day, and eating a half dozen apple cider cinnamon sugar donuts on this amazing farm is officially a fall ritual. My children pulled me into the corn maze and promptly took off with a herd of friends, leaving me wandering about the impressive maze for a fair bit of time, which I did not mind one bit. This farm was incredible, with a barn full of hay, slides, and a dried corn pit. My kids leaped with friends approximately 476 times until the sweat poured down their bright pink cheeks. Kids need this. They need to play so hard that they collapse in hysterical laughter and go home with hay in their hair and mud on their boots. Spending the day surrounded by rad, wise, beautiful women and a pack of wild and free children is something precious and nourishing. I often share adventures here and mention that we were with a big group of friends, and some of you have asked how to cultivate your own tribe in your neck of the woods. When we first moved up to the Pacific Northwest 2 years ago, we knew almost no one and had never even been to this state. So I started a homeschool adventure club that I call Hack School, through which I organize one new adventure each week. We have grown close to so many wonderful families and gotten to experience so much that this area of the country has to offer through this simple effort. For those of you interested in starting your own Hack School group, I'm working on something to help you do just that, so stay tuned. If you want to see photos and videos of these adventures, then head on over to Sage Parenting on Instagram and follow along. I first met Azine 12 years ago when I was in my marital and family therapy practicum, and she was in her clinical psych practicum, right?
Yes.
So we go way back. We shared a passion for children and families, and we've just been in connection and alignment ever since. And now she has her own practice. where she specializes in all this goodness. So she was the perfect person to chat with me today about emotional regulation. So tell us your story, Azine. Who are you? What are you passionate about? What about your relationships in life fulfill you? And what is your relationship with this topic of emotional regulation?
Well, thank you for that introduction. um, let's see, where to begin? This question is always so much, Rachel, when you ask it.
I know it's a lot. So, well, because on most podcasts, it's like, what do you do? And but that, there's so much baggage with that, right? Like, what does that really mean? Like, how do I earn a living? Because when people ask me that question, it really doesn't tap into what what I'm passionate about and what fulfills me and how I'm connected to the issue we're actually talking about. So I have to go and make it super complicated. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. It actually makes sense. So I guess I can start back with, just growing up and my passion for children. I've always been around children and always have been assisting in some way. And I pursued psychology, had worked with children for such a long time. Then motherhood came and everything flipped in terms of my understanding and work with children.
And to those of you who've been listening for a while, that should sound familiar because that's basically my story as well.
Yes. And I feel like it's many people's stories, especially
for sure.
Because we are given so much direction and education on how to help families, but truly until you become a parent, you don't quite understand all of the nuances and challenges that come with it. Yeah. So I guess first and foremost, I'm a mother. And I think that has really shaped not just the work that I do, but why I do the work that I do. And my colleague, Dr. Rosalie Feiner, and I co-founded Harmony in Parenting because we're just so passionate about helping families and working through a lot of the challenges that our society doesn't necessarily help with or support us in.
Yeah. Oh, I love all of that. And in earlier episodes, we've talked about how hard it is to find the right people to invite onto your team when you're looking for support. And I'm often telling people, you might find 10 people who aren't a good fit or 20 people who aren't a good fit before you find one that is. And Azine is one of those people on a very short list of people who I would feel totally confident and happy about sending my clients to. So I just want to put that out there for everybody who's listening.
That's a huge compliment. And you know that I've been trying to send many people your way because we're so aligned in our philosophies.
So true.
That we're trying to put a message out there that can help change the way we're helping children.
Exactly. So let's start with brain development. Let's start with the context. Talk to us about brain development so we can have some context for what our kids are working with when we're, in this conversation about emotional regulation. I feel like it has to start there.
It does. I feel like that's actually one of the foundational pieces for parents in terms of understanding where to go. Because with brain development, I think as adults, sometimes we take it for granted just how far along our brains have come. And so it can be hard to even understand what's going on for a little one, let alone a teenager, right? Like it sometimes makes sense to us why they're responding the way they are. And may have their emotions taking over more so than their rational parts of their brains. So the brain is super complex, and I'm going to do my best to simplify it and keep the accuracy of how it works. But there's the emotional kind of system of the brain, which is like the limbic system, and then there's the cognitive system, which is a rational prefrontal cortex that really helps us make decisions, can help us with managing our emotions, planning out things, right? It's what we use a lot as adults just throughout the day. But there are times, even for us adults, that the emotional system will just take over and we lose access essentially to that computer brain that is able to figure things out and notice like what coping I need right now. And the thing with that prefrontal cortex is it doesn't even fully develop until about age 25. So we often have this expectation, though, for our little ones or even our teenagers, that they're much more further in their development than they actually are. So they haven't built all of the tools and the connections that they need to manage the emotions. And that's where we as adults come in to help and form new connections and provide tools to our kids.
Yeah, sometimes when, the first step when I'm working with parents, the very first thing we do is we look at their expectations. And I'm often starting by telling parents, or in their journey of like deschooling or unpacking their parenting baggage, that you cannot train a child to be further along in their development than they are. Like you said, that prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until 25. So no matter how many times, a mainstream parent might punish their child for crying because their cup is red, it's not going to move them farther along in their development.
Right. And I know we talk a lot about like discipline versus punishment, and like really truly we are needing to teach our children. And so how can we work with our children to teach them new things rather than, for instance, punishing, like you're giving an example of, which doesn't give them a new skill, a new tool to help them along. And we have to meet our children where they're at too.
Yes.
Like you're saying, we can't just push or expect them to move along. It's a process. It takes time. And every child has just a different place that they're at, regardless of their age or whatnot. There is no clear, by this moment in time, your child will achieve A, B, and C.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh man, I get so many requests for like developmental charts, and I'm like, where's your child? Let's meet them there. And often it goes back and forth like 10 times, but if I could just have this, so I could set my expectations to like the averages, but your child is not an average. So let's look at where your child's actually at and scaffold from there. But yeah, understanding that prefrontal cortex. We watched this like YouTube yoga video once that called the prefrontal cortex, the owl, and the amygdala, the guard dog. The amygdala is that like caveman lizard brain where you're operating off of instincts, and it's really strong. It has a really loud voice, and it's pretty well developed when babies are born because those are all their survival instincts. Like if nothing else, they needed that. But for kids to try to understand this, because research shows if you explain these things to them in their language and at levels that they can understand, it helps them along that path of development as well. That, if you think of the prefrontal cortex as the wise owl who sort of can remove themselves and float above the reactivity of this situation and have a broader perspective and make really rational choices. And then the amygdala is like the guard dog. So they both serve really important functions in your child's brain, and they both help them. But to get them to start understanding, like, is it the guard dog who's telling you that this is, just to sort of give those different feelings and those different thoughts, what's the word I'm looking for? Not personification, because it's an animal, but what's the literary word for when you animalize something?
Oh dear, you're asking the wrong person.
I'm totally going to have to Google that after this podcast. But yeah, things like that, you can have them draw like their owl and draw their guard dog. Or if like a guard dog doesn't resonate with them, like I often use the word warrior with my kids, whatever it is. But to sort of start to teach them about these things as well, that can help them to understand. And if they can understand, it can help them to better control it. The whole brain child.
Yes.
I'm totally blanking. What's his name?
Dan Siegel.
Dan Siegel, yes, thank you. Is a great book for helping parents to understand the way that kids' brains develop and how that plays into their emotional regulation.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up teaching the child, because yes, we do need to help our kids even understand what is going on with their brain, because sometimes they take it as if it's something there, like that's wrong about them.
Mm-hmm.
they internalize all of these very normal experiences and feelings, and it's harder to kind of move away from challenging issues. It really plays a role in their self-esteem too. So I love that you can't have these animal ideas or different kind of symbolic meanings to help children understand like that rational versus the emotional aspects of the brain.
Anthropomorphism, does that sound right? I'm totally going to have to Google this. All right, so let's talk about mirroring. How does the parent's emotional regulation factor in?
Well, I think we often forget just the role that we play in our children's lives, and we talk about how children are watching our every move, and truly, they're absorbing how we respond to things and learning from that, as well as when we as parents are not noticing our behaviors and whatnot, that plays a role in terms of what we're passing along to our children. So I think it's so important for parents to notice what's going on for themselves. As adults, we have to stop and kind of look at what's our internal emotional need or challenge at that moment and be able to regulate ourselves, because we're modeling. We're modeling all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, your emotional regulation is the single most determinant factor in your child's emotional regulation. So really hear that. Those mirror neurons, which we have talked about on this podcast before, mean that you are unconsciously drawn to mirror your child's emotional state, which can be like the death spiral where you tumble down that rabbit hole with them, and that your child is unconsciously drawn to mirror your emotional state. So you can be the calm emotional anchor that your child needs. And we talked in the last episode with Debbie Reber about neurodiversity, and she mentioned lending your child your prefrontal cortex, and that's really what we want you to think about. Like sort of conceptualize it as what you're doing when you're role modeling for your kids. We're going to talk about collaborating around steps and tools for your children, but hello, mama, what steps do you move through when you feel triggered? Expectations are often the root problem there. We get triggered when we have an inappropriate expectation, and inappropriate for who your specific child is and where they are at today. So if you find yourself getting triggered by the same scenario more than once, your expectations are off. Call them out. Accept your child, accommodate their needs, and adjust or recalibrate your expectation. If you are tired of losing your shit and want specific tips for staying calm, cool, and connected, then I have a fantastic free program that you can go grab from my site at sageparenting.com/get-started. So that's just something if you need really concrete stuff, but role modeling, right? Like unbelievably powerful.
And you're talking about the expectations we have for our children, but sometimes the expectations we have for ourselves are so off.
Yes.
And that is a trigger, because let's say you are in the middle of the grocery store or what have you, and your child is having a moment, right, where they can't handle what's going on. And when we're worried about how others are perceiving us, or if I'm not a good enough parent because my child is acting out in the middle of the store, I'm going to be more triggered and probably more likely to try to shut it down quicker.
Yes.
No, it doesn't help. You just said it mirrors, right? So I get triggered, the child gets triggered, and we're going back and forth.
Mm-hmm. The death spiral. Yeah, perfection is not the goal. Like I think I have like 3 different memes that basically say that same thing in different ways, that perfection is not the goal. If you have a parent who went your entire childhood and never yelled once, that would do you a disservice in the sense that you would never have had a role model to show you how to stumble and get back up, and how to course correct, and how to calm themselves when they feel like they're starting to spin out. I mean, I'm obviously not advocating for yelling at your children, but I am absolutely advocating for being human. And like you said, for having appropriate expectations for yourself as well.
Yeah, we are human. And it's so normal to have those moments where we lose, right? And like, I love that you said that this is a perfect opportunity to show our children how to deal with that. 'Cause yes, we all do. We all have those moments. And so, again, coming back to expectation, how are we expecting our child to also handle all of those moments 100% of the time when we as adults, we struggle? I mean, just sitting in, I see so many people struggle honking their horns for a minute long, something.
Yes. And if we expect ourselves to be perfect, we also expect our children to be perfect, which isn't fair to them and it's not fair to us. So let's talk about, when I help families with emotional regulation and they're actually in the moment and saying, what do I do when shit starts to hit the fan? The first step that we talk about is accept, reflect, validate feelings. So what does it look like or sound like to accept, reflect, and validate your child's feelings, which really is the first step in responding to emotional dysregulation?
Right. I want to start with the accept piece, which really also has to start internally, which is accepting that it's okay for our child to feel sad. It's okay for our child to be mad, because this, again, plays into that expectation that we have or certain baggage that we were raised with, right, where certain emotions are just negative and not okay. But when we give that message, our children are definitely feeling that, and that doesn't help them cope with the emotion.
Yeah.
So to be able to accept and reflect would look something like, I see that you're feeling sad maybe right now. I'm wondering what's going on, or I'm wondering if you're needing a hug. And really, you're just validating the feeling rather than rejecting it or shutting it down. You're giving them space to have that feeling. And I love, there was an article that I read, and I'll look it up for you, Rachel, so you could put it in the links in the end.
Thank you.
It has this idea of emotions as a tunnel that you have to let your child go all the way through to get out, right?
Yes.
We have to get in it to get out of it. So thinking of the emotional need in that moment as actually leaning in, getting into it, so that we are able to make it out of the tunnel.
Yeah, so often we, particularly, kind of coming from that mainstream path, we want to skip this step entirely and we want to go straight to the behavior. And that misses the point entirely. And a lot of times when people will see me work with children, especially young children, and they make comments about maybe being very impressed with the what I'm able to accomplish with children, this is like the number one secret, just that accept, reflect, and validate their feelings. Like when they start to get upset, if you can just do this step, like you will up your parenting game, like next level.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And it almost feels like a magical moment.
Yes.
To see the child calm down, you're like, wow, all we did was just sit with the emotion, and they calmed themselves because they felt heard and seen. And I often try to remind adults that just imagine when you're feeling really upset and you just need your friend to hear you, rather than say like, what are you so mad about? Or like, that's nothing.
Yeah.
Kind of minimizing it. It's almost the same in terms of like how we sometimes treat children, right? And like, oh, stop crying. Like you don't need to be upset,
Yeah.
And even if we're being the most gentle and loving in our voice, and of course it's done with the greatest of intention, it's just not helpful though.
Yeah.
So, which is really why I'm passionate about getting a different message out so that parents can try something new and see how much it really works.
Yeah. And it starts when they're babies, really, because sometimes I'll be working with a mom with an infant and the baby will start to cry, especially like if we're in a stressful setting. And as they start to spiral, I'll pause and say, as they're trying to solve the problem, I'll say, what's your goal in this moment? And if they're struggling, it's almost always to stop the crying. And when we flip that, when we say, how about right now in this moment, shift the goal to just validating the feeling. Say things like, I hear you. I'm here. Tell me all about it. And in like seconds, the baby calms down. And that's a small human who can't even really understand the words, but they feel that difference. They feel the intention that you're accepting their feeling and you're listening to them and you're reflecting it back. And they can actually pick that up even in your facial expression, which is really simple. But if you mirror their emotion in your face, that validates their emotional experience.
Yeah, and I feel like it's not just our facial expressions, but our body probably changes in terms of attention, right?
Absolutely.
When we're so worried about something, our body will tense up, right?
Yes.
Your shoulders will come up and all of those things, and your baby will feel it because you're holding them usually when you're trying to see them. Versus when you change your intention, you kind of let that melt away and you're focusing on something that is so much more doable in that moment, which is just hearing your child and being present.
And if we can make that shift, so if we start off with our goal is often to quiet the negative emotions, we tend to carry that with us as they get older. So then it becomes a little bit harder to change it because we're sort of in the habit of if they express something negative, we want to shush it. Like we want to make it stop. We want to squash it. And so really what we're talking about is doing the exact opposite and sitting, crawling into that puddle with them and just feeling it. Mm-hmm. And some parents feel like that would take too long, that would take too much energy. It ends up taking so much less time and so much less energy. And then, of course, in the long run, you're building up their understanding of themselves and you're giving them tools and skills they can use. And most importantly, because this is all about connection-based parenting here on the Sage Family Podcast, you are enhancing the connection that you guys share.
I was just going to say that too. You're building your relationship and making it stronger. And really, you're talking about infancy where it's all about building that trust, right? The baby needs to know that they could trust the person that's going to take care of them to be there and to give them not just what they need physically, but also emotionally meeting their needs. Yeah. And, sometimes when we're utilizing like punishment or when we have the rigid thinking in our heads in terms of like, oh, my child can't do this, what we're creating is more distance. Mm-hmm. Even the resentment, right? Because it doesn't feel good to be in a power struggle with a person that you want to be showing you love and care. It feels sometimes,
like you said, you need somebody to hold that space, to hold your emotions when they're too big for you to hold them. Mm-hmm. And so my filter before I open my mouth and say anything to my kid in a challenging moment is this a step toward or a step away from? Like, is this a step into connection or a step away from connection? And that honestly is my filter. And even sometimes after doing this for so many years and working so hard on it, a lot of it comes second nature now. But even still, every once in a while, if I'm feeling really triggered, I will consciously run through that filter first. If I'm about to say something or I'm about to do something, is this going to move in the direction that I want to? Is this going to move us closer? And sometimes I have to adjust course slightly before I open my big fat mouth.
Absolutely. And I feel like the other thing that we need to be sure we're understanding is that being present or being there with the emotion isn't about giving in. Because I know that's the other misperception that we often have around gentle parenting is that like you're giving into anything that they would like in that moment. But it's really like, I see you're upset that she wanted the toy at the same time as you. And right now she's playing with it. Maybe we could wait for our turn, or maybe you can play with something else, right? It's not like, well, let me go get that toy for you.
Yeah, meeting the underlying need is not the same as giving in to every want. And you may, like when we move from infancy to toddlerhood and beyond, especially, you may have to establish a boundary first or containment. For example, holding your child and saying, I can't let you hit her before moving into the feelings step. So feelings step, that accept, reflect, validate the feelings, that's my first go-to. But every once in a while, especially when they're around that, toddler, preschool-ish window, you may have to have a boundary first. So if your kid is grabbing something away from someone else, you may have to position yourself between the two of them and have that, establish that containment first. But this is really the main course of action in helping your child with their emotional regulation. You're helping to make sense of their inner emotional world, which can feel overwhelmingly stormy and chaotic and confusing without the language to identify it. And you're helping them to process their experience. So it's not even just about feelings per se, though that is always the starting point, but about validating their experience. Mm-hmm. So no matter what words are coming out of my kid's mouth, I am only reflecting and validating their feelings and experience. For example, if my kid says, he's the worst, I might say, you feel hurt and outraged. He ate it all. He ate the last of the ice cream. It wasn't his. That ice cream was for us all to share. This feels really unfair to you. So you don't have to exactly get it right. Even getting it wrong helps them to become aware of their feelings and experience. And then lastly, you got to keep it brief, one small sentence at a time. So some of us, as you all know, if you listen to this podcast, I can be quite chatty. But when I'm talking to kids, especially the younger they are, you got to keep it brief. You can't have an hour-long therapy session with a 3-year-old. Like one brief sentence at a time.
Yeah. And, my goodness, there are so many things that were rushing through my head as you were talking. I didn't want to interrupt. Yes, definitely validating that experience. And sometimes we don't know, like you said, you may get it wrong and they have the opportunity to say, no, I'm not hurt. I'm feeling whatever it may be, and that is great that they're able to label their feelings. And part of the beauty of starting this from when they're infants and when they're really young is you're giving them words to all of their experiences and feelings so that they're more capable of articulating it as they get older, right? Which is really part of our goal, right? We want our child to eventually come and say, I'm feeling sad and I need a hug, but it doesn't start that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of us who weren't raised this way, as we're helping our children with it and we're working on that role modeling piece, we're learning for ourselves to, instead of flip out and yell at our partner, to be able to say, I'm feeling so overwhelmed right now. I know that you just wanted to do this simple thing, but it's feeling to me like I'm all alone in the not fun stuff, or like whatever the issue is, to be able to actually identify what you're feeling and to put words to your experience and to share that. Yeah. It is really, really important, and a lot of us are still learning how to do that.
It requires us to slow down.
Yeah.
And we have become accustomed to rushing through things and to being productive, getting things done, that we lose sight of even our own feelings. And I've definitely experienced that as well, where I'm like, what was I feeling? Oh, I have to go back and reflect and process. So I label that feeling because I didn't know why I did that.
Yes. And this is like mindfulness, right? Like there's just tremendous research about how beneficial mindfulness is. And really what mindfulness comes down to is just being present, slowing down, being present, and being aware of the experience you're having in your emotions and in your body and in your mind. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what we're talking about teaching kids when we're working on emotional regulation.
Right.
So we are all about connection-based parenting here. So how do we keep our compasses set to connection in the heat of emotional dysregulation?
I feel like we have talked a lot about the different things, which could be partly understanding, right? Understanding our child's needs, setting our expectations, or really adjusting our expectations, and providing that empathy and validation helps with that connection. But with regards to making sure we are more regulated so that we could be more in connection, I think it comes down to catching ourselves, finding those moments where we're rushing through, where our compass is misguided, and bringing ourselves back. I think the more that we're aware of when our compass is off, the more likely we're able to bring it back.
Yes. I think one helpful tip is to check in with yourself before you respond, which I know I mentioned earlier, but is my goal to modify their behavior or nurture our connection? Like, just run through that filter before you respond. And spoiler alert, the latter is the answer that will get you where you want to be. The path that actually does improve the behavior. Ironically, if you focus right out of the gate on modifying the behavior, it tends to make everything worse. So stop fighting against your child and join with them. And also keep in mind that love given is less important than love received. By that I mean, how does your child receive love or support in their hard moments? Because everybody is different. What is their unique love language? In collaboration with one of my kids, they requested a big hug when they're struggling with emotional regulation. Another kid often wants space. And even though space is certainly not my love language, it can be a struggle for me and not always easy in a big family. But I honor their way of being. And lastly, I want to add that sometimes it is you that your child is reacting to. And in those moments, connection can look like, I'll be sitting right here reading a book on the floor whenever you're ready for a hug or to talk. So I've been known in coaching to say, don't feed the storm. Set that line of connection so they know without a doubt that you are accessible, and then move on. I'm going to go back to cooking dinner, but my loving arms are waiting for you whenever you're ready. Because sometimes if we just stay in it with them and keep trying to force our words and our affection on them, it just feeds the storm and it just keeps going and it keeps growing. So sometimes we have to disengage, just set that line of connection first, make sure that they know that you're accessible, and then move on and then be ready when they come to you.
Yes, and it's so different than just walking away, right? Like,
Yeah.
Sometimes we have utilized the silent treatment, which is like abandonment or rejection, and it doesn't feel like any loving arms are waiting.
Yeah.
Versus saying, really setting that stage for, I'm here no matter what. I'm going to give you what you need right now, which it seems to be space at this moment, so that you can do what you need to do and then come back to me. And I love that you're talking about how your children need different things. My one child needs different things depending on the challenge.
Yeah.
So sometimes she needs the space, and sometimes she just needs that connection and comfort right away in order to work through and co-regulate what's going on for her.
Yeah. Well, and after the storm passes, after it's passed, you have to repair the damage through small collaboration. So I ask my kids, how can we move forward together? That is a question that they are accustomed to hearing on pretty much a daily basis. It might involve an apology or a cleanup or a proposed solution, but it's basically, how do we address the problem and move on? Your children have the best solutions, so trust them. Then walk beside them through the solution, and then you all move on. Often parents stew in the drama while kids are able to easily let go. So move on, mama. Be in the present moment. What has collaboration looked like with your daughter in moving forward from a hard moment?
Well, she is just approaching 4. And so it's, the simple steps that you have mentioned in terms of, simple, not so simple, accepting and validating. And so let's say it's in the moment where she is frustrated that it's bedtime and that playtime is over. And I validate those feelings, but she's feeling anger towards me, it seems, in my point of view. So I allow her to have that space, and I let her know that I'm here when she's ready. And usually she will just come to me and say, oh, I want to read a story now. And she gives me the idea. I don't even have to ask her you know. And there are other times where she will have a response to something external from us, and she just needs my hug or support. So I just ask her. I kind of give her some options right now as we're at the younger stage. But I love the idea of, yes, giving your child the opportunity to come up with the ideas, because they do come up with great ideas and they know what they need in order to move on. And they already understand, for the most part, like what's right versus what's wrong, like morally.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't be asking for something that is just plain wrong.
Yeah, that it just never happens. And sometimes it's about repairing the damage, for themselves, or just moving forward together, or repairing something with you. But sometimes there is damage or harm that we have to address with other people or with the environment. And even in those situations, I've just found my children and all the other children that I've spent so many years working with, they just come up with the best solutions. And if they don't have a solution, they ask. So if one child destroys another child's block creation, in anger, and then their feelings have de-escalated and they want to repair the damage or, fix the harm, they'll go to that child and they'll ask. Like when the child and I will be talking and trying to come up with a how to move forward solution, if they say, I don't know how to make it better, I'll say, well, let's ask, and they'll go over and they'll say, how can I make this better for you? Is there anything I can do to help? And then that child will come up with a solution that, again, we trust. It might seem completely out of left field, like, can you bring me a yogurt? Sometimes it's even completely unrelated, and then the kid will be like, sure. And then the damage is repaired.
The beautiful thing is that you're giving examples also of when children ask because they trust, right?
Yeah.
You've establish that connection, that trust, so that they know they could come to you for guidance.
Yeah.
Right. Versus when you feel disconnected or you feel like rejected or invalidated, you're less likely to seek out that guidance.
Right.
And as parents, we do want to be there to guide our children. So that's such like a big reason why connection is so important early on. We're setting the stage for those teen years, for the adult years, when you still want to support your child and be there in some way. Yeah.
And all of these skills that we're talking about, and I know that in some points in this conversation, it veered toward the younger set, even though my kids are older now. But just the examples are easier when they're younger. But even like asking, how can I help? I mean, that's such a powerful question. And when my husband says that to me, like if I'm struggling with something and if he can tell me like, gosh, you seem so overwhelmed and it looks really hard, how can I help? Like that, like, how can I help question? Like you have to have, like you said, you have to have trust to be able to ask that in relationships and to be open to what the other person says. And so not only is this something that we can use with our kids and that our kids can use with us and with each other, but that's one of those like long-term life skills that can go with them in all of their relationships.
Yes, absolutely. We're definitely forming those, the building blocks for the rest of their lives early on.
So let's talk about big collaboration. So far, we've been talking about responding in the hard moments, and now I want to shift to cover the place where the most effective work happens. Big collaboration. Have a collaboration session in a quiet moment, and I'm talking prevention, like prevention. What are their triggers? What unmet emotional need is beneath the behavior? Play therapy in the form of figure role play and art play with externalization and personification. And I go into detail about all of that in the Sage Parenting book, and I would need another hour to to go into all of the details of it here, but it's incredibly powerful. So coping skills, which are steps that your child practices moving through. Again, when they're not upset, you sit down and you have them come up with some ideas, and you can contribute some ideas too, and you make a plan and you practice it when nobody's upset. So what kinds of things have you seen be helpful for the families you work with?
Definitely prevention, like you had mentioned. There are some things that we know are reoccurring, right? So it's really about figuring out what's going on, that's the trigger, and developing a plan to transition. And this requires the child to participate, in terms of giving ideas and telling us what's going on for them. So in sessions, I encourage family sessions, I encourage families to have these discussions in this moment, and I can provide some of that guidance and give the context of why it's important. But also, I encourage them to do it outside of our sessions so that we can look at, what were the challenges in trying to even form a collaboration, for instance, and how we can move forward from there. But yeah, there's so much. You ask such broad, big questions.
I'm sorry. And shout out to Ross Greene's book, The Explosive Child, which
I love that book.
Must read for sure. It's on my must read list for all of this, for all of these, for the collaboration piece. It's incredible.
It is. Yes, I love that book. It's been a while. My goodness.
So I posted in my Sage Parenting Tribe on Facebook that we were going to chat about emotional regulation today and asked if anyone had any questions about it. And there were a lot of questions and hopefully we answered a lot of them throughout the episode. But Pascal asks, what are the consequences of not meeting this need in children? What does it look like? How does it manifest? And she's basically asking, why does this matter?
Right. And the thing is, we have this, again, coming to expectations that children can self-soothe from an early age. And so that kind of sets us off course, though, for what our children actually need. Our children need this co-regulation because this is the piece that helps them self-soothe over time. This is the piece that helps them manage those big emotions that come up as they're developing and as they're progressing towards adulthood. So, we see it in ourselves as adults when we struggle through something, but some adults will struggle more than others, depending on how their childhood looked like, their environment, and what have you. So really, you're forming these foundational pieces that can assist your child through each stage. So maybe in one stage, it'll be about sharing toys versus grabbing them or throwing them or hitting other kids, right? Versus you're moving to the teen years, and it would be more like being able to figure out who is the guide that I want to go to seek out this information. Is it a trusted adult? Is it my peers? And we know that peers aren't necessarily the best influence, especially when they have their own struggles, right? So the coping mechanisms that our children start learning about come through the people they go to for guidance. And hopefully they have people within their trusted system and in their environment that are providing good role modeling and healthy role modeling. But other times we'll see, some unhealthy coping, and it can be as extreme as like the drugs or risky behaviors. Yeah. Unfortunately, and that can progress into adulthood. Not saying that if you mess up, if you blow up on your child, there's no room for repair. We definitely believe that there is, and those are the challenges that help us progress and learn if we take the time to go back and repair them and apologize and model what we wish we did or just talk about it.
I love that you brought up even like addiction, because my answer to this question is shame. If you punish your children for their feelings and for behaviors that stem from a lack of development and skills, you are pointlessly filling them with shame. When kids can do better, they do. And for more details on the detrimental effects of shame, see anything written by Brene Brown. And this is the same skill set and process that adults need to move through. So these are lifelong skills we're talking about. When I was first unpacking all of my parenting baggage and getting my sea legs with parenting, these were steps that I would very consciously move through. But now that my kids are 13 and 10 and 6, this is just our relationship. Like, this is our family culture. This is the way we love and support and show up for each other. And my kids show up for me and for all the other people in their lives the same way. And it's such a gift to get to witness. It's so incredibly rewarding that if you invest that energy on the front end, I promise you'll get it back in dividends.
And it's a process too. I mean, you're talking about how much older your children are, but yes, those sea legs at the beginning when we feel like we are lost or that we're not sure how to go about this thing called parenthood. We have to give ourselves a little bit of kind of forgiveness and understanding that this is a very challenging role in our lives, and it requires so much of us because it is so important to us.
Yeah.
So definitely recognizing that it is a process and being easier on ourselves in some ways to just go through this.
Yeah. All right, let's move into a day in the life. Describe your favorite day this week and share with us why you loved it.
My favorite day this week was just a day with my daughter. It was nothing was planned. I wanted to get out of the house though, and we found a place that she would like to go to. We would both like to go to. And what was just so fun about it for me was that I didn't have to worry about the time. I didn't really have to worry about being anywhere next. And that's kind of rare in my week because it is a lot of just one thing after another. But having those moments are just so precious because it allows me to kind of be in her shoes for a moment. So we went on like a trolley ride, and it was her first time.
Aww.
And she was just like, wee, like, this is so cool. Like, this is what Daniel Tiger does. And it was just, it's so precious to just be present in that rather than like, oh, okay, well, where are we going to next? And what are we leaving that kind of rational adult's brain, that planning side, away for a moment just to be present with the happiness. And then we talked a lot about being present with just those hard emotions, but it's so lovely to bask in joy with your child.
Oh, and you are so right.
That truly builds connection. I mean, just when they giggle or when they're smiling or you see what brings them excitement, you're like, oh yeah, that was exciting to me as a kid.
Yeah, you get to live in that joy with them when you're in connection and being present.
Yeah, and just noticing all of those small things. Well, it seems small, but in their minds, it's everything. So she was coloring a little figure, and she told me the reason why she was just focusing around the mouth is because, oh, they just ate pink frosting. I'm like, oh. Okay. In my mind, I'm like, why aren't you coloring all the rest of the part?
That's the important part, pink frosting. Come on.
Frosting. I get it now. Like, I was able to enter her world. That was my favorite part of the week, favorite day of the week.
Oh, that was a good one. All right, now our deep dive. The show notes can be found at sageparenting.com/podcast20, where you can also subscribe and get future show notes sent right to your inbox. So what are your favorite resources for people to dive deeper into this topic?
You mentioned Daniel Siegel. He has a few books out there, not more. And he is a wonderful source. He's a psychiatrist that explains the brain development so well and gives so many different tools to parents. There's like a section in harvard.edu's website that provides a lot of resources and articles too, which I love to like browse through and get information from. And I do a lot of my reading and whatnot with the younger age. So I also have like the 0 to 3 website that I enjoy, kind of using their web courses, webinars, and other resources that again focus so much on this brain development, the emotional regulation piece, and so much more. But you are also amongst them, Rachel, because coming into motherhood, you are the one that I think helped me open up and see a different side and start to explore and delve further and further into this world of gentle parenting. Which so I'm so appreciative of you.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome.
I love you, Azine.
Because I don't know where I would be on my parenting journey if I hadn't run into you and 12 years ago and continued to like be in touch with you. So yeah, super important to have people that you feel can align with what is valuable to you.
Oh, I could not agree more. I'm so proud of all the work that you're doing, and I'm so happy to wholeheartedly recommend you and invite you here to come on and have a conversation with me so all these other women out there can get to be in connection with you too.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm also always trying to provide different resources myself for families, like, writing articles, blogs, many of which are now posted on the Motherly website, but I have links to them on my Harmony and Parenting website.
Yes, we will definitely be linking to your site. So for all of you guys who want to get out there and get in contact with her, I will be including that in the show notes as well. And you are not on social media for the rest of the world, right?
I am. We have a Facebook page and Instagram, so I'll send it to you.
Okay, awesome. I feel spoiled because I get to talk directly to you. Okay, I will include links to all of your goodness. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today, Azine.
Thank you for having me. Such a pleasure.